She wasn't your typical outlaw. She didn't wear spurs or rob trains, and you wouldn't find her in a shootout at high noon. But Belle Gunness may have been one of the most terrifying figures to ever haunt the pages of Old West history. With charm, cunning, and a taste for blood, she lured unsuspecting victims into her deadly trap, earning the nickname Hell's Belle and cementing her legacy as the Black Widow of the American frontier. How did one woman turn a quiet farmstead into a house of horrors? How many victims did she really claim? And did she get away with it all? Stick around as we uncover the chilling true story of Belle Gunness. And if you love stories about the darker side of the Old West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because history isn't always dusty. Sometimes it's downright deadly. Belle Gunness, often referred to as Hell's Belle, is considered one of the most notorious female killers in American history. Many researchers believe she was responsible for the deaths of her two husbands and all of her biological children. What is known for certain is that she was involved in the mysterious deaths of several romantic partners and her two daughters, Myrtle and Lucy. Between 1884 and 1908, Gunness is believed to have orchestrated the deaths of more than 40 individuals in both Chicago, Illinois, and Laporte, Indiana. Her motives appeared to be financial, collecting life insurance payouts, securing personal property, and conducting fraudulent schemes. After a suspicious house fire in 1908, Belle vanished, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and speculation that continues to this day. She was born Brynhild Paulsdatter Storseth on November 11, 1859, in the village of Selbu, Norway. The youngest of 8 children in a working-class family, she was raised by Paul Pedersen Storseth, a stonemason, and Berit Olstatter. Growing up on a modest farm in Inbogda, she became known for her unusually strong build, standing around 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighing over 200 pounds. One story that has been passed down, though never fully confirmed, suggests that as a teenager, Brynhild may have experienced a traumatic incident at a local dance. Reports claim she was physically assaulted by a man from a well-connected family, leading to a significant emotional and physical toll. Though the alleged attacker was never held accountable, those who knew her said her demeanor changed noticeably after the incident. Not long afterward, the same man reportedly died from what was described as stomach cancer. While there's no concrete evidence tying Brynhild to his death, the timing of events has fueled speculation among historians and crime researchers alike. After leaving her home in Norway, Brynhild Storseth found employment as a domestic worker on a well-to-do farm. She remained there for several years, gaining experience and saving money. In 1881, following in the footsteps of her sister who had already emigrated, she made the journey to the United States. Upon arrival, she adopted the name Belle to better fit into American society. Belle eventually settled in Chicago, Illinois, where she again worked in domestic service. By 1884, she married Mads Albert Sorensen, a fellow Norwegian immigrant. 2 years later, the couple opened a small candy store together. Unfortunately, the business struggled, and before long, both the shop and their home were destroyed in fires under uncertain circumstances. The insurance payments they received allowed them to purchase a new home. The Sorensens went on to have 4 children: Caroline, Axel, Myrtle, and Lucy. Sadly, both Caroline and Axel passed away during infancy. At the time, the cause of death was recorded as acute colitis, a condition that involves symptoms such as nausea, fever, and digestive discomfort. These symptoms, however, were also common to a variety of other ailments known in the 19th century, including certain types of foodborne illnesses and chemical exposure. The couple received life insurance payments following the children's deaths, which was not unusual for the time. According to the 1900 United States Census, Belle was listed as the mother of 4 children, with only Myrtle and Lucy noted as surviving. Also living with the family was a 10-year-old girl named Morgan Couch, later known as Jenny Olson, who was described as adopted or in Belle's care. On July 30th, 1900, Mads Sorensen died unexpectedly. Coincidentally, on the single day his two life insurance policies were both active. One physician initially believed the symptoms suggested poisoning. However, the family's regular doctor had treated Mads for a heart condition and attributed the death to heart failure. Because the death was not immediately considered suspicious, no autopsy was performed. After the unexpected passing of Mads Sorensen, some members of his family voiced concern and requested a formal investigation. They believe Belle may have had financial motives tied to his life insurance policies. However, despite these suspicions, no legal action was taken. Belle ultimately received $8,500 in insurance benefits, a considerable amount for the time, equivalent to roughly $250,000 today. With this money, she purchased a farm property on the outskirts of Laporte, Indiana. Soon after acquiring the property, reports surfaced that both the boathouse and carriage house were destroyed by fire. Around the same period, as Belle prepared to relocate from Chicago to Laporte, she reconnected with Peter Gunness, a fellow Norwegian immigrant and recent widower. Peter, who worked as a butcher, married Belle on April 1st, 1902 in Laporte. Just 1 week into the marriage, tragedy struck again when Peter's infant daughter from his previous marriage died unexpectedly while alone in the house with Belle. Then in December of the same year, Peter himself passed away under unusual circumstances. Belle explained to authorities that Peter had suffered a fatal blow when a sausage grinder fell from a high shelf in the kitchen. However, upon viewing the body, the local coroner is said to have quietly expressed doubts about the explanation. Around the same time, one of Belle's children reportedly told a classmate that their mother had caused Peter's death, though this account was hearsay and could not be substantiated. An official investigation was launched, but Belle, who was regarded by many as confident and persuasive, was never charged. A year later, Peter's brother, Belle Gunness, came to Laporte and took custody of Peter's older daughter, Swanhild. She would ultimately be the only child to live in Belle's home and survive. Peter's death resulted in another life insurance payout to Belle, this time in the amount of $3,000, or about $85,000 today. People in Laporte were increasingly skeptical. Many locals found it hard to believe that Peter, a skilled butcher and former hog farmer, could have been so careless with heavy equipment. The district coroner took the case seriously and publicly stated his belief that Peter's death was not accidental. A coroner's jury was convened to further review the evidence. Still, Belle maintained her innocence and successfully persuaded the authorities to close the case without charges. Interestingly, during the inquiry, Belle never revealed that she was expecting a child. She gave birth to a son, whom she named Philip, in May 1903. Toward the end of 1906, Belle Gunness informed neighbors that her foster daughter, Jenny Olson, had left to attend a Lutheran college in Los Angeles. The explanation seemed plausible at the time, and no one questioned it. However, years later, Jenny's remains would be discovered buried on Belle's property, revealing a much darker reality. In 1907, Belle hired a farmhand named Ray Lamphere to assist with daily chores around her Laporte farm. While he began as an employee, rumors soon circulated that their relationship may have been more personal than professional. When under the influence of alcohol, Lamphere occasionally spoke openly about his closeness with Belle, claims that surprised locals who were more familiar with her rugged, no-nonsense demeanor. To the community, Belle was often seen wearing men's work clothes and managing her farm with an air of independence. She handled butchering duties herself and kept a tough, self-reliant appearance. But Lamphere seemed to know a different version of Belle, one that would soon be revealed to others in town. Despite her bond with Lamphere, Belle appeared to be seeking a more profitable or stable partnership. She began placing personal advertisements in the lovelorn columns of newspapers throughout the Midwest. One of her ads read, "Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in Laporte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with a view of joining fortunes." No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with a personal visit. Triflers need not apply. The ad caught the attention of several middle-aged men of financial means. Over the following months, Belle was frequently seen in the company of unfamiliar gentlemen, especially on Sunday afternoons. She dressed in elegant clothing, styled her hair with care, and carried herself with a charm that was quite different from the rugged farm image the locals were accustomed to. These public appearances, often marked by carriage rides with new companions, painted a picture of a woman who lived two very different lives, one familiar to the townsfolk and one entirely hidden. Among the men who responded to Belle Gunness's personal advertisements was John Moe, a recent arrival from Elbow Lake, Minnesota. He reportedly brought over $1,000, which he told neighbors was intended to help pay off Belle's mortgage. She introduced him to those around her as a relative, specifically her cousin. Yet within a week of arriving at her farm, Moe vanished without explanation. Not long after, another suitor appeared, George Anderson of Tarkio, Missouri. Like Moe, he seemed serious about a future with Belle and even offered to pay off her mortgage if they married. One evening, while staying overnight in the guest room, Anderson was startled awake. According to Anderson, he opened his eyes to see Belle silently standing over him, holding a lit candle and gazing into his face. He later recalled that her expression filled him with dread. Without a word, she quickly exited the room when he let out a loud cry. Feeling deeply unsettled, Anderson dressed in haste and quietly left the house that same night. He boarded the earliest train back to Missouri and never returned to retrieve his belongings or to see Belle again. While Anderson made it home safely, other men who visited Belle's farm were not as fortunate. The flow of prospective suitors continued, but none were seen again after their initial visits. Around this time, Belle began ordering heavy trunks to be delivered to her property. She kept her home tightly shuttered at all hours and rarely interacted with others in town. Next to arrive was Olby Budsberg, a widower from Iola, Wisconsin. On April 6, 1907, Budsberg was last confirmed seen at the Laporte Savings Bank, where he finalized a mortgage on his land and withdrew a significant amount of cash. His sons were unaware of his plans or that he had traveled to visit Gunness. When they later tried to reach out to her for information, she wrote back stating she had never met their father. Throughout 1907, this pattern repeated. Several men, middle-aged and financially secure, came to visit Belle's farm. None were known to leave. In December of that year, Belle began corresponding with Andrew Helgelien, a bachelor farmer from Aberdeen, South Dakota. Their letter exchange quickly became affectionate, and in January 1908, Helgelien received a particularly persuasive letter written in Belle's neat script and dated January 13th. That letter would later be discovered at the Helgelien family home and would play a key role in what came next. The letter Belle Gunness sent to Andrew Helgelien in January 1908 was heartfelt and filled with romantic anticipation. It began, "To the dearest friend in the world, no woman could feel happier than I do right now. I know you are coming to be with me, and I am certain you are the right man for me. Your letters have shown me everything I need to know. It doesn't take long to recognize true feelings, and I feel more for you than I ever have for anyone else. Just imagine how wonderful our time together will be. Just the two of us, alone and content. Can anything be more perfect? I think of you constantly. When your name is spoken, whether by one of the children or when I find myself quietly humming it to the tune of an old love song, it sounds like music. My heart feels full when I think of you, dear Andrew. I love you. Please come ready to stay with me forever." Moved by the letter's tone and sincerity, Helgelien made immediate plans to travel to Laporte. He arrived in January 1908, bringing with him a check for $2,900, his life savings, which he had withdrawn from his hometown bank in South Dakota. A few days after his arrival, Belle and Andrew visited the local savings bank in Laporte to deposit the funds. The relationship appeared serious, at least on the surface. Around this time, Belle's relationship with her farmhand, Ray Lamphere, began to unravel. Lamphere had worked loyally on the farm and had reportedly developed strong feelings for Belle. He had tolerated the steady stream of suitors she invited to the farm, though it clearly affected him. When Ray learned that Andrew Helgelien was more than just a visitor, potentially Belle's future husband, he reportedly became upset. Following an argument, Belle dismissed him from her service on February 3, 1908. Shortly afterward, Helgelien was no longer seen in the community. Not long after his disappearance, Belle returned to the bank and deposited an additional $1,200. Not long after dismissing Ray Lamphere from her employment, Belle Gunness went to the Laporte County Courthouse with serious concerns. She reported that Lamphere was mentally unstable and could be dangerous to the community. Somehow, she persuaded local officials to hold a hearing to evaluate his mental health. After undergoing examination, however, Lamphere was declared mentally competent and released. Belle soon returned to the sheriff's office, now claiming that Lamphere had shown up at her farm and engaged in a heated disagreement with her. She insisted he posed a risk to her household and managed to have him arrested for trespassing. Despite this legal action, Lamphere continued trying to make contact. Belle refused his visits and forced him to leave when he appeared. At one point, Lamphere confided in a nearby farmer with a cryptic comment, reportedly saying, "Helgelien won't bother me anymore. We fixed him for keeps." Meanwhile, Andrew Helgelien's brother, Assel, became increasingly uneasy. When Andrew failed to return home or write, Al sent a letter to Belle asking for information. Belle responded by claiming that Andrew had left her farm and likely traveled to Norway to visit family. Assel was not convinced. He replied that his brother had given no indication he planned such a trip and expressed his belief that Andrew was still somewhere in the Laporte area. Belle answered once more, stating that she was willing to help with the search, but if her time and effort were involved, Assel should compensate her. In a separate matter, Belle contacted a local attorney named M.E. Laporte. She said she feared for her safety and that of her children, claiming Lamphere had made alarming threats against her. She said he had talked of doing her harm and even burning down her house. Because of these fears, she asked the lawyer to help her draft a will. The document left her estate to her children, a move that suggested she was genuinely concerned for their future. Interestingly, she never reported these alleged threats to the police. In February 1908, Belle hired a new farmhand named Joe Maxon to assist with daily work. Just a few months later, in the early morning hours of April 28th, Maxon woke to the smell of smoke while sleeping upstairs in the farmhouse. When he opened his door, he was met by flames and intense heat in the hallway. He called out for Belle and the children but received no answer. Acting quickly, he shut the door, climbed out a second-story window, and narrowly escaped the blaze with his life. Joe Maxon ran into town as fast as he could to get assistance, but by the time help arrived, the Gunness house had already burned to the ground. Among the ruins, authorities discovered the remains of 4 individuals, an adult woman, notably missing her head, and 3 children. Laporte County Sheriff Albert Smutzer, who had previously been informed of Ray Lamphere's alleged threats toward Belle Gunness, arrived to inspect the scene. Upon examining the circumstances, he quickly determined that the fire was not an accident. Instead, he believed the incident involved intentional destruction and loss of life. Sheriff Smutzer assigned 2 deputies to search the wreckage for the missing head, hoping to confirm the identity of the adult remains. At the same time, he dispatched 2 more deputies to locate and detain Lamphere. Lamphere, who had once worked for Gunness, denied any involvement. He insisted that he was nowhere near the property at the time of the fire. However, a local boy came forward stating that he had seen Lamphere running down the road away from the Gunness farm just before the blaze broke out. Based on this report, Lamphere was arrested and formally charged. Although he claimed he was innocent, few were convinced. Initially, investigators assumed that the adult body belonged to Belle Gunness and that the children were her 3 young children, Myrtle, age 11, Lucy, age 9, and Philip, age 5. But almost immediately, doubts began to surface. The physical characteristics of the deceased woman did not match what was known about Gunness. The body was estimated to be around 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed roughly 125 pounds, much smaller than Belle, who was widely described as taller and more robust. Several individuals familiar with Gunness, including 2 neighboring farmers and a few friends, were asked to view the body. They stated clearly that the woman they saw was not Belle. As uncertainty grew, a local dentist offered his expertise. He explained that if any dental work was recovered from the remains, he could potentially confirm whether it belonged to Gunness. Investigators resumed their search through the ruins and soon found a partial set of dental bridgework. The dentist positively identified it as a work he had previously done for Belle. Based on this finding, Coroner Charles Mack officially declared that the woman's body was indeed that of Belle Gunness. During the ongoing investigation, Helgelien arrived in Laporte from South Dakota. He approached Sheriff Smutzer and expressed his belief that his brother, Andrew Helgelien, had likely fallen victim to foul play involving Gunness. Assel shared that Andrew had responded to a personal advertisement placed by Belle in a Norwegian-language newspaper. In her letter, she had promised companionship and a hopeful future together, but also mentioned that she needed $1,000 urgently to settle a mortgage. Andrew withdrew his entire savings from the bank before heading to Laporte, and after that, he was never heard from again. As Helgelien stood at the site of Belle Gunness's burned home, his suspicions of foul play grew stronger. He watched as the men searching for her head unearthed more unsettling items: several men's watches, various bones, and human teeth. Feeling increasingly convinced of a larger mystery, Helgelien took it upon himself to search the property. He directed the men to dig in a specific area near Belle's hog pen, where he suspected something was hidden. As they began to excavate, they uncovered 4 bodies, all expertly dismembered and wrapped in oilcloth. One of these bodies was soon identified as that of Andrew Helgelien, Belle's former fiancé. This discovery added further weight to the growing evidence of her involvement in the disappearance of several men. Around the same time, Joe Maxon, a farmhand who had worked for Belle, came forward with crucial information. He told Sheriff Smutzer that Belle had instructed him to fill in depressions in the ground with dirt. These areas were located near a high wire fence where the hogs were fed. Maxon was told that the depressions were filled with rubbish, but the task of leveling the ground seemed odd to him. Several local farmers also recalled seeing Belle digging in this very spot during the night, fueling even more suspicion about the purpose of these activities. Sheriff Smutzer, now deeply alarmed, returned to the property with a team of men on May 3, 1908, to continue the search. As they dug deeper, they uncovered the body of Jenny Olson, a woman who had vanished in December 1906. The search continued, revealing 2 more unidentified children's bodies. As the days went on, the list of bodies found in the hog pen grew. Among the identified victims was Ole B. Budsberg from Iola, Wisconsin, who had disappeared in May 1907. Thomas Lindboe, who had worked for Gunness as a hired man after arriving from Chicago, was also found. Henry Gerholt from Scandinavia, Wisconsin, had come to Laporte to marry Gunness, but his remains were found along with a watch matching his description. Other identified bodies included Olaf Svenerud from Chicago, John Moe from Elbow Lake, Minnesota, and Olaf Lindblom, a 35-year-old from Wisconsin. Additionally, the remains of Benjamin Carling, a Chicago man who had traveled to Laporte in 1907 with $1,000 in insurance money, were discovered. His widow later identified him based on the contours of his skull and missing teeth. The remains of these men, along with those whose identities could not immediately be confirmed, sparked widespread attention. News of the grisly discoveries spread throughout the Midwest, and soon more reports of missing men began to surface. Relatives from various states arrived in Laporte, hoping to identify their loved ones. They recounted stories of brothers, uncles, and cousins who had been lured by Gunness's matrimonial ads, traveling to Laporte with their savings, eager for a new beginning, only to disappear without a trace. Many of the people listed in this account were likely additional victims of Belle Gunness, though definitive proof could not be established. One such case was that of Christy Helgelien, a man from Dovre, Wisconsin. Helgelien sold his farm in 1906 and traveled to Laporte, but he was never heard from again. Charles Nieberg, a 28-year-old Scandinavian immigrant living in Philadelphia, made plans to visit Gunness in June 1906, but he too disappeared. Nieberg had been employed by a saloon keeper and was carrying $500 with him at the time of his trip. John H. McJunkin from Coraopolis near Pittsburgh left his wife in December 1906 after corresponding with a woman in Laporte. He vanished shortly thereafter, raising suspicions. Olaf Jensen, a Norwegian immigrant from Carroll, Indiana, wrote to his family in 1906 about his plans to marry a wealthy widow in Laporte. He was never seen again. Bert Chase, a butcher from Mishawaka, Indiana, sold his business and told friends he was going to meet a wealthy widow. His brother received a telegram claiming that Bert had been killed in a train accident, but after an investigation, it was revealed that the telegram was a fabrication. Another mysterious case involved George Bradley, a hired hand from Tuscola, Illinois, who was said to have gone to Laporte in October 1907 to meet a widow and her 3 children. His fate remains unknown. T.J. Tieflin, a man from Minneapolis, is believed to have traveled to Laporte in 1907 to meet Gunness, but there are no further records of his whereabouts. Frank Riedinger, a farmer from Waukesha, Wisconsin, arrived in Indiana in 1907 to marry but never returned home, his disappearance remaining unsolved. Emil Tell, a Swede from Kansas City, Missouri, was reportedly another victim, having traveled to Laporte in 1907 under the pretense of marrying Gunness. Lee Porter from Bartonville, Oklahoma, separated from his wife and mentioned to his brother that he intended to marry a wealthy widow in Laporte. He too disappeared without a trace. Johnny Hunter, who lived in Duquesne, Pennsylvania, left on November 25, 1907, to marry a wealthy widow in northern Indiana. His fate became more suspicious after his belongings were found, but he was never heard from again. Abraham Phillips, a railway worker from Burlington, West Virginia, departed for northern Indiana in the winter of 1907 to marry a widow. His railway watch was later discovered among the debris of the Gunness house, suggesting his connection to the case. There were also other reports of missing individuals who may have been victims. One was the daughter of Mrs. H. Witzer from Toledo, Ohio, who attended Valparaiso University near Laporte in 1902, though details about her disappearance remain unclear. Another potential victim was an unnamed couple who vanished in September 1906, the same night that Jenny Olson disappeared. Gunness later claimed that the couple was a professor and his wife from Los Angeles, who supposedly took Jenny to California. But this story raised more questions than answers. A brother of Miss Jenny Graham from Waukesha, Wisconsin, had left to marry a wealthy widow in Laporte, but also disappeared under mysterious circumstances. An unidentified 50-year-old man from Ohio, who had worked for Gunness, reportedly disappeared, and Gunness was later found to have become the heir to his horse and buggy. Finally, there was a man from Montana who had told people at a resort that he planned to sell Gunness his horse and buggy. These items, along with several others, were later found at Gunness's farm, but the man's fate remains unknown. Most of the remains discovered on Belle Gunness's property could not be definitively identified. Due to the crude methods used in recovering the bodies, the exact number of victims remains uncertain. However, investigators were able to piece together the remains of 14 individuals, with additional fragments like teeth, bones, and watches left behind. Estimates suggested that as many as 40 people may have been murdered on the farm. On May 22, 1908, Ray Lamphere stood trial for murder and arson. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, with his defense centered around the argument that the body found in the ruins was not Gunness's. Lamphere's attorney, Virt Warden, suggested that the dental work discovered in the remains might have been planted to mislead investigators. Ultimately, Lamphere was convicted of arson, but acquitted of murder. On November 26, 1908, he was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in the Michigan City State Prison, where he died from tuberculosis on December 30, 1909. After Lamphere's death, a reverend came forward with a statement about a confession Lamphere had made before passing away. According to the reverend, Lamphere claimed that Belle Gunness was still alive and that he had never murdered anyone himself. Instead, he had helped Gunness bury the bodies of her victims. Lamphere described how Gunness would initially charm her victims by offering them a large meal and making them comfortable. Once they were relaxed, she would drug their coffee, and while they were in a stupor, she would kill them using a meat chopper. On other occasions, after her suitors went to bed, she would sneak into their rooms by candlelight, chloroform them, and then carry their bodies to the basement. Once in the basement, Gunness bundled the parts and buried them in the pig pen. In some cases, she would dispose of the remains by boiling them in a vat and then covering them with quicklime. According to Lamphere, when she was too tired to perform this gruesome task, she would feed the remains to the hogs. The mystery of the headless female corpse found in the ruins of Gunness's house was also explained by Lamphere. He claimed that Belle had lured the woman from Chicago under the pretense of hiring her as a housekeeper. This occurred just days before Gunness made her escape from Laporte. Lamphere stated that after drugging the woman, Gunness struck her in the head with a heavy object, killing her. She then dressed the body in her own clothes, removed her false teeth, and placed them next to the headless body, hoping to deceive investigators into believing that the corpse was her own. Belle Gunness is also said to have affected her children, possibly by smothering them or using chloroform, before carrying their bodies to the basement of the house. Afterwards, she set fire to the small brick farmhouse and fled the scene. Ray Lamphere, her former handyman, was supposed to meet her at a designated spot after the fire, but she never arrived. Instead, she crossed open fields and vanished into the woods. Lamphere later claimed that Belle had amassed significant wealth through her crimes. According to his account, she had murdered at least 42 men and stolen sums ranging from $1,000 to $32,000 from each of them. By the time she disappeared, he estimated that she had accumulated over $250,000, an amount equivalent to about $6.7 million today. Investigators had examined her bank accounts, and while a small balance remained in one of her savings accounts, the majority of her funds had been withdrawn shortly before the fire. This suggested that Gunness had carefully orchestrated her escape and likely eluded the authorities. Over the following decades, numerous reports claimed to have spotted Gunness across various cities in the U.S. As late as 1931, one report suggested that she was living in a Mississippi town, where she had become a wealthy and well-regarded member of the community. Another theory proposed that she might have been a woman named Esther Carlson, who was arrested in Los Angeles in 1931 for poisoning a Norwegian-American man, August Lindstrom, for his money. Carlson's case was linked to Gunness by two individuals who believed they recognized her from photographs, though the connection was never conclusively proven. Carlson died in 1931 while awaiting trial. The remains discovered at Gunness's farm included the bodies of her children and several of her victims, but the headless female corpse found in the ruins was never definitively identified. It was presumed to be Belle Gunness, and the body was later buried next to her first husband, Mads Sorensen, at Forest Home Cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. In 2007, with permission from Belle's sister's descendants, forensic anthropologists and graduate students from the University of Indianapolis exhumed the headless remains to try to determine the true identity. They hoped to extract DNA from a sealed envelope flap found at the crime scene, but unfortunately, the sample was insufficient for a match. As a result, the mystery of the identity of the headless corpse remains unsolved. The story of Belle Gunness, Hell's Belle, remains one of the most chilling tales from the Old West, a true testament to the dark depths of human deception and greed. While the mystery of her ultimate fate still lingers, what remains undeniable is the trail of victims she left in her wake. Men, women, and children whose lives were tragically stolen by a woman who expertly masked her murderous intentions behind the guise of a loving widow. But as more stories like Belle's emerge from the shadows of the Old West, one can't help but wonder, how many other secrets remain buried in history's pages, waiting to be uncovered? Join us for more gripping tales from the untamed past that you won't find in the history books.